A quick introduction for North Dakota's Representative Joshua Boschee. He was first elected to the North Dakota House of Representatives in 2012 and was reelected for his third term in November of 2020. Josh spent most of 2018 running to be North Dakota's 15th Secretary of State. While he didn't win that race, he was elected by his fellow caucus members to serve a second term as the House Minority Leader. Prior to serving in legislative leadership, Representative Boschee served on the House Industry, Business, and Labor Committee and the House Agriculture Committee. Now he spends most of his time on state budget-related issues, supporting the priorities of the Dem-NPL caucus and partnering with other legislative leaders and the governor to pass policies that improve opportunities for North Dakotans. This interim, he is one of 2 Democratic MPL members on the redistricting committee. When he's not representing his North Fargo constituents in Bismarck, Josh serves as the broker for Hatch Realty, leading a team of 40 real estate agents and support professionals. Before he jumped into real estate, Josh worked in student affairs for 8 years at NDSU and MSUM, where he found his passion for helping people establish, implement, and achieve their goals. An avid fan of everything downtown Fargo, in his free time, you can find Josh enjoying the food, sounds, and lifelong along Broadway. A veteran of many Fargo-Moorhead area nonprofit boards, he serves on the board of directors for Prairie Public Broadcasting. Josh lives in North Fargo with his partner, Zach. And I will now pass it over to you, Representative Boschee. Thank you.
Thank you, Nicole, and thank you to North Dakota Native Vote for having me tonight. It is great to be with you all tonight to talk about the redistricting process, and I couldn't agree more, Nicole, in the fact that we need to educate North Dakotans on the process and how they can be engaged in the process. I actually have just returned with Senator Aaron Oban and 3 of our Republican colleagues from Salt Lake City last week, where we were at a redistricting seminar put on by the National Conference of State Legislatures, which is one of our national organizations for state legislators. So came back with a lot of information, and I hope not to bore you tonight, but hopeful to also educate you so you can get more engaged. So I've put together a brief slideshow to help guide the conversation and also be a resource for you all. So if you wouldn't mind putting up the slides, we'll kind of walk through some of that as a walkthrough tool and have some examples for folks to see there. Thank you. So if we go to the next slide, just some basics with redistricting. Now, first and foremost, I think it's important to note that we are in August of 2021 already. In any other decennial census year, the data from the U.S. Census Bureau would have been provided to the state of North Dakota and all the other states sometime in April of this year. But due to the pandemic and the challenges faced by the U.S. Census Bureau to make sure that we were doing a full and complete count, that has been delayed on top of some of the previous administration's delays that they had put in. And so what has happened now is that we won't get the data we need to make a decision in November until the end of August. And so we're on a really tight schedule this interim for the redistricting committee. Typically we have 8 or 9 months to do this work. It'll be compounded down into 2 full months. And so it's important for us that as we do that, again, regardless of political party or ideology, that we do this as transparently as possible and make sure we do it with input from the voters. So as you can see there, just the basics on the slide there, redistricting 101. Every 10 years, the U.S. Census occurs, and after the census occurs, that data is compiled and provided to the states for them to go through the legislative redistricting process. Many other states, except North Dakota and 6 others, also go through what's the reapportionment process. So that is the decision to draw new congressional district lines. It's kind of exciting for us in the upper Midwest or Mountain Great Plains, and the fact that Montana has now qualified for a second congressional district. And so they will go through for the first time in a long time, I believe, the reapportionment process. But in North Dakota, since we don't have the population to sustain more than 1 congressional delegate, we do not do the apportionment. The legislature will focus solely on legislative redistricting. This last spring, during the legislative session, House Bill 1397 was introduced and passed. That created a redistricting committee comprised of 16 members of the legislature, 8 from the Senate, 8 from the House of Representatives, and that breaks down proportionally based on the number of folks based on each political party to 14 Republicans and 2 Democrats. So I'm the Democrat from the House, and my colleague Senator Aaron Oban is the Democrat from the Senate. And then there has been an effort by legislative leadership to make sure that all of us, regardless of party, are representing different corners of the state and different communities, because we know our communities, excuse me, fairly well, and want to make sure that we are making decisions that are best when it comes to representation. I think a key part within the bill, there's specific language. You see that first bullet there that says the plan must provide, quote, compact and contiguous territory and conform to all constitutional requirements with respect to population equality. The committee may adopt additional constitutionally recognized redistricting guidelines and principles to implement in preparing a legislative redistricting plan for submission to the Legislative Assembly. I share that specifically because I want to make sure I break down the myth of folks of, certainly there is the conversation of gerrymandering, and it does happen throughout the United States, and it could be argued that it's happened here in North Dakota. But when I show the map in a little bit of our legislative districts, you'll notice that for the most part, they are fairly consistent with following county lines, following natural dividers such as a river, making sure that we're keeping tribal nations within a legislative district so that they aren't subdivided and splitting into 2 different districts. And so there has been a good effort there, but certainly there could be the argument that, especially when we get down into some of the more populous areas where there are multiple districts from a county, that there might be some lines that don't make sense as far as, and if you look back in the history, it might be because someone lived there or someone didn't. And so that's certainly an argument that can be made. But the committee will also seek input from citizens and stakeholder groups throughout the process. If you were to go back to the 2011 minutes from the 2011 Redistricting Committee, which you can access at legis.nd.gov and go to the 2011 interim session, you'll be able to read through the minutes, and you'll see how the committee traveled to different parts of the state. Most of the committee work happened in Bismarck, but then different groups came and presented and shared information on the different plans that were being proposed. This year, because of the efforts to make sure that we had live streaming as part of a hybrid legislative session this last spring, we have the great opportunity to, regardless if we're in Bismarck or if we go to somewhere else in the state, we will have the ability to share our meetings, live stream them to everybody. And in some cases, people, if they sign up ahead of time with Legislative Council, will be able to participate remotely. So it's really important for us to make sure that we have folks there. So as we flip through the slides here, you can see Redistricting 201. In 2011, again, going back to the last time we redistricted, the legislature approved 47 legislative districts, which comprised approximately 14,310 people in each district. I say approximately because there ends up being, just based on how the lines get drawn, a variable at that set time in 2011 where a district might have had 13,957, another district might have had 14,832, as a way to make sure that you keep small communities together, or you're not having a district line go through the middle of a community, trying to keep counties as whole as possible. So that 14,310 would be a perfect division of 47 legislative districts by the population in 2011. And if you wouldn't mind pulling up the PDF now, we can show everyone what those districts look like currently. There we go. Thank you. So as you see this map here, and I'm going to point like you guys are all sitting behind me, but if you look at the bottom left-hand corner, that's District 39 in the green. So you can see that, Representative Kempenick, Senator Shively, and Representative Schatz, they have quite the territory to travel. I mean, it is 2, 3, 4, 5.25 or a third of counties that are involved. It's a large landmass. Whereas you go somewhere like the city of, Burleigh County and Morton County, or Cass County on the east side of the state, and Grand Forks County, there's multiple districts in just the smallest part of a footprint of what would be in District 39. If you look at District 14 in the center of the state, it goes from almost the Canadian border all the way down to south of I-29, or excuse me, I-94. And so while it comprises of about 4.5 of counties, that's a great amount of distance that those legislators, excuse me, have to cover. And so by advocating for something like an AB district, the senator may represent would represent that entire landmass, but we would divide it in half and put a line where it made sense, maybe along a highway, or trying to make sure that it was split evenly by population on the north and south side, so that there could be a representative from the north part of the district and a representative from the south side of the district, to make sure that, whether it's the counties that are different, or the school board, the water resource districts, the communities of interest, are able to be well represented. And if you wouldn't mind scrolling to, I believe it's the right, you'll see that there's the population in 2011 of the different districts. And this is available. We'll make sure we can send this out. There's a link for it at the end of my presentation. But we talked about that the goal was to have 14,310 people in each district. But if you look at District 1 up there, which is in the northwest corner of the state, they have 14,395 people in 2011. But if you scoot down to District 15, which is the Devil's Lake area, they have 13,697. So they had 613 people less. And so the committee will set a standard deviation that we'll have to work within. And that's a way to make sure we protect the integrity of the work. But that'll be part of the conversation we have in the first meeting on August 26th. So thanks. You can go back to the slideshow now. Yeah, so now we look at 2021, the second bullet down there. And the census data that we got in April was for the whole of the state. So according to the census that was done, there are now 779,074 North Dakotans. And so while we have the state data that came in April, we don't have the breakdown of exactly where those people live, as far as which communities, which counties, and so forth, because that number still had to be finessed and worked out through the Census Bureau's work. But if we keep 47 legislative districts, which is the primary conversation we've been having, there isn't too much of a strong desire to increase or decrease the number of legislative districts. If we keep 47 districts, that means each district grows to 16,576 people. So our job is, we can't just accept the same map that we had. We have to redraw the lines to make it more equitable for each district. And that's going to be based on the fact that the people who have moved out of a district or moved into a district since 2011. If you'll go to the next slide, please. And so this is a breakdown of the approximate population shift for each legislative district. It's broken in half so I could fit it on a screen. So you have districts 1 through 23 on the left side, districts 24 through 47 on the right side. But the best data we have is right now is the 2019 census population estimate. So that's a rough figure of the number of people that live in that district. But if you see there in the third column of each set, if we're doing 16,576 people in each district, the amount of people that need to be cut out of a district, or the number of people that need to be added in a district. So if there's a red number, those are the number of people that need to be cut out. So essentially a district will get smaller in geography. If it's black, which most of those districts are, that means there would be population loss. And so we have to physically grow those districts. And as a rural state, it is getting increasingly harder to do that because the districts get so large. So the conversation someone might say is, well, why don't we have 49 or 51 legislative districts? And I think that's certainly an argument to be had to keep the districts in smaller population size. But in the end, that still ends up benefiting some of the larger communities first. The Cass County, Burley, Morton County, and then Watford, Williston area that have seen the significant growth in the last 10 years, they would still get the new districts. And by doing that, then there's more representation, and there still isn't the representation in the rural communities. It really just keeps the current rural communities in smaller districts. So what'll happen is when we get data on April 20, the end of April, I think it's April 6th, excuse me, August 16th, we'll update that 2019 census population estimate to be the 2020 population data, and then we'll know what number we're really working with. But you can see there, if we look at districts 1 and 2, that's the northwest corner of the state. That's Williston down to just outside Watford City. So of course, energy growth right there. District 7 is borders outside of, it wraps around Bismarck. So you can see that that district has to get physically smaller. District 16, 22, 27, those are all in the southern part of West Fargo and Fargo, where there's been major population growth. District 47 needs a little bit of cutting as well. That's the north part of Bismarck, again, where there's been some significant growth. Those communities are going to be a focus. But if we look at the next slide, I've pulled out the legislative districts that have tribal nations in them. And so if we break that down, District 4 is MHA Nation, District 9 is Turtle Mountain, 23 is Spirit Lake, and 31 is Standing Rock. So you can see that, again, looking at the 2019 estimate, that number of people live in the district. And then if we go off of 16,576 people, how many more people we have to go get to make that district as close to 16,576 as possible. So the physical geography of these districts, and again, the tribal nations are in rural parts of the state, is going to grow. And so again, the strength of having conversations and looking at adopting a redistricting plan that has A-B districts allows us to do sub-districts similar to what South Dakota, Montana has done, in which some of the tribal nations in those communities have been able to elect a representative directly from the tribal boundaries. So it's not a perfect science in terms of the number of people that are represented from that reservation, because Turtle Mountain's reservation is much more populous than Spirit Lakes based on the census data and the people that were counted. But in some instances, again, in South Dakota and Montana, some of the tribes have their own representative, and that's a way that has been able to comply with the Equal Vote Act from the 70s, and in some cases, I believe it was Montana that came through from a lawsuit to allow tribal nations who make up what we call a majority minority district the ability to elect a representative from their community to make sure that their voices are heard. Next slide, please. So just some key dates coming up, and we're wrapping up here because I know we want to get into Q&A. Again, I talked about we're in this condensed calendar. Typically, we would have started meeting as the redistricting committee right away in May after we recessed from legislative session, but we aren't able to do that now because we didn't have the data. So coming up next week, the committee members, the 16 of us, will have a training with Maptitude. Maptitude is the software that we use, and we used in the 2011 session. And I think the vast majority of states, political parties, interest groups use Maptitude's redistricting software as well. What helps with that is that they will be able to dump census data into that software specific to North Dakota, and then we'll be able to start working with potential maps to propose to the committee and to interest groups and to the citizens as part of our public hearings. On Monday, August 16th, the U.S. Census Bureau is going to release what's called the legacy redistricting data. There's going to be 2 data releases you're going to hear. And so it's important to understand the difference between them. The legacy data on August 16th is essentially, if you're a computer programmer or a statistician, it's going to be giant multi-millions of cells of spreadsheet or whatever format it comes to, that essentially you and I would look at and we wouldn't know what to do with it because it's got every data point that the census collects. But that'll be turned over to our vendor, who says that it'll take 4 or 5 days once they get that to be able to put that into Maptitude, to test it out and to turn it over to North Dakota. And then of course there are other clients that they work with. So beginning August 26th is going to be our first redistricting committee meeting in Bismarck. And again, that is going to be in person. You can participate, or you can observe online through the legislative website. And you can sign up for getting those links on that site as well. And then we'll spend a good chunk of September and October meeting several times for public input and to provide draft plans for deliberation. In the 2011 redistricting process, the meetings were mostly in Bismarck, but there was a meeting, I believe, in Fargo, and then there was a meeting in Devil's Lake, and the intention of the Devil's Lake meeting was to be able to be close to both Spirit Lake and Turtle Mountain. One of the it's not a complaint. One of the comments made by people who have done redistricting in the past is that in that effort to try to connect with tribal communities, supposedly there was very little to no response from the tribal communities. So it's great that we have an organization like North Dakota Native Vote now, who has the trust of folks around the state to help organize and make sure that not only are people turning out to these meetings, but also different communities are being represented. And as we all know, or we need to continue to educate people, is while we have 5 tribal nations that share the borders of North Dakota, no 2 tribal nations are the same, just like no 2 counties are the same, or no 2 cities. They have their communities of interest and their economies and their challenges and opportunities. And so just because Spirit Lake is advocating one thing may not mean that MHA agrees with the same thing or has a different variation of it. So it's important that we get input from all the communities, and I'm again appreciative of North Dakota Native Vote's work on that. The second data release is going to happen on September 30th. Just real quick, that's going to be, there might be some changes between the 16th and 30th, but the 30th data is intended for people like you and me. It's going to be on a database. It's going to be able to allow us to play with it and get us data specific so we can read it. Those of us that with some rudimentary ability to read maps and to read data, that's the data. So between the 16th and 30th, they're going to basically, for lack of a better word, dumb it down for most Americans so we can use the data in our decisions, and interest groups are going to use it in a variety of things for the next 10 years. And then the redistricting committee has until November to propose a plan to the Legislative Assembly. And so we have to ask the governor to call us back in November. And right now, the tentative dates for the special redistricting session would be the week of November 8th, in which the full legislature would come back in, and similar to the legislative session, then there would be full hearings on the proposed maps, which would be in bill form. So there'd be a legislative bill and a legislative action, and then that'll be acted on. So as I wrap up here, I just want, next slide, please. Just give some tips to folks. As we try to get folks to participate in the hearings, we want to make sure that it's done in a way that is well received by committee members. There's certainly going to be people who are going to show up and be frustrated or making accusations about things like gerrymandering. And when we see it, we should call it out. I'd encourage folks to come to the initial meetings and really just observe and participate and share your points. The last thing you want to do is upset a legislator when you're trying to educate them and inform them on the issues that are important to you. So I tell every group I speak to that, come prepared, try to focus on 1 to 3 key points that you want to get across. And being brief and focused will help ensure you get your points across. There are times where people come and they'll go on for 20 some minutes, and you're going to lose legislators after a few minutes because they know there's a line of other people that want to speak. So it's important to say what needs to be said, but to try to do that in a brief and focused way. And one way you can do that is by providing written testimony to be distributed to the committee members, something that we can read later or ahead of time. What's nice is usually it gets hyperlinked on the website so that the public can have access to it too. And even if you don't read the entire written testimony, you use it as your Cliff Notes version for what you're going to say. Having it in writing, I think, is a helpful way to document it and to provide it to the committee. Use the opportunity to be informative. You're your own expert of your community. So talk about why the redistricting, what suggestions you have for where lines might fall, what counties might be better paired together than others. And even if you can tell a story, I think stories, especially as a legislator who deals in policy, excuse me, it allows us to remember the story a little bit better in the speaker and what they're talking about. And then, as I said before, don't come in accusing, especially right away when the committee starts working. There may be instances where there are going to be shenanigans. We've all lived in through legislative sessions, and we know that things can happen. That's the time to call it out. Let's focus on building relationships on the front end. And then, certainly, just because there's 16 people on the committee, you all have your own 3 legislators. So take that time to meet your legislator now. If you don't know them, introduce yourself, whether it's in person to meet them for coffee, through a phone call or an email, and let them know that they're going to be hearing from you during the upcoming special session. And so that can help build a relationship as well. And so I look forward to working with North Dakota Native Vote. I love the fact that we are going to have a lot of people across the state being engaged in the redistricting process, even though it's going to be a whirlwind of an experience. But I'm glad I get to be at the table, and I hope I can be helpful in making sure that we have fair redistricting in the state of North Dakota. So that's my prepared comments. I'm going to turn it back over to Nicole and Jessica, and I'm open for questions whenever we're ready for them.
Thank you so much for that detailed presentation. That was very helpful. First of all, I would like to ask the audience if they have any questions for Representative Boschee. We'll just keep monitoring the chat. So let's start with this question that we have for you. So what are you most excited about, and how can we as citizens be helpful in the process of redistricting?
Yeah, I'm excited. I'm excited. It's a once in every 10-year experience, and I think based on the membership of the committee and in my conversations with my fellow legislative leaders, that there's really an interest in making sure we do this the right way. No one wants to be in a lawsuit. No one wants to have to deal with some noise or legal issues after we draw the map. And so I think one thing that I'll share with you guys, and will certainly be part of the conversation for the redistricting committee, is I was at this conference last week in Salt Lake City, and there was 3 themes of the conference. The first theme was do the right thing, make sure you're not doing your shenanigans, that you're making this as least political as possible. The second is be as transparent as possible, use technology, engage with people, take public comments as much as you can. And the third is you're going to get sued. There are going to be lawsuits in most states, and that's what's being expected of. But because of that, and going into the conference, some of my colleagues from the majority party actually came into the conference talking about, maybe we should have a serious conversation about sub-districts for some of our tribal communities. It's an opportunity for North Dakota to decide with North Dakotans how to do it, rather than have a court decide for us and what those lines look like. And kind of like, I think it's either Montana or South Dakota, it was a lawsuit that brought on some sub-districts. But, so that was uplifting to know that there's some conversations happening, and I think we can go into these hearings over the next 2 months about the value of sub-districts, especially for tribal communities.
Yeah, I believe it was South Dakota that had that went through with the lawsuit for the sub-districts. And I believe the sub-districts are located only on the reservations.
Correct.
So I know Standing Rock and Cheyenne River are split up into 2 districts. So they are able to elect the candidate of their choice. Thank you for that. And so a question that we had sent in was, what processes do you expect the committee to use for mapping? Will you begin with urban areas and then rural, or is there a certain way that you will do that?
Yeah, no, that's a good question. The way I see it happening, and again, reading the minutes from the 2011 work of the redistricting committee, and then already the conversations I've had with some of the members of the committee, is I think we're all going to go to our own little corners of the state and have conversations with folks from there. So being from Cass County, we already have 10 legislative districts in the county, likely to get another new district. Same with Burleigh County or Watford City area, Williston. And so, as Cass County, I've visited already with some of the Cass County members of the committee, and then we want to have conversations with Cass County leaders about what should that look like. We have in West Fargo, We have legislative districts that cross between Fargo and West Fargo. We have legislative districts that have a rural and an urban component. So are there pros and cons to that? Should the rural part of the county have its own district for communities of interest versus having to deal with what the big city wants, and the smaller communities have to not be represented or don't get as represented as much? So we're having those conversations. So we also know then some of the rural legislators are already having conversations because their fear is, again, as these districts as rural areas have lost population, those districts have to get geographically bigger. So for lack of a better word, it becomes a little bit of cannibalism. It becomes where a district's going to eat into another rural district. And so I think many of those rural legislators want to be able to say, well, this is an opportunity for us to make sure we get whole counties together. So you're not splitting counties between districts, or an opportunity to make sure that, there's a clear divide between the Red River Valley rural districts and the central, grain more focused and soybean based areas, and then the West. So I'm eager because while the committee will make the final decision, I think a lot of the ideas are going to come from the different corners of the state.
Great, thank you. Another question from the audience: has there been any discussion about scrubbing the current district lines and redrawing a set of 47E district boundaries?
Yeah, good question. So, and if I could try to take the time to educate folks a little bit, I think on the background of that question is oftentimes when people go into redistricting, it's about incumbent protection. It's about, these were the 47 districts that existed from 2011 to 2021. So that's our starting point. And I'll certainly be raising at the first meeting the idea of, as you talk about essentially scrubbing, of let's just shake up the Etch-a-Sketch. Why do we have to say that because a District 44 existed in this format, it only needs to go 10 blocks into District 21? Because that's the beauty of the software. The scary part of the software is you can put whatever data you want in the software, and I can push a button and I can have 100 different maps based on voter turnout, based on partisanship, based on race and ethnicity, gender, college education, you name it. Or we can take that software and basically, like I said, make an Etch-a-Sketch where we just push and we let the software. How do we want 47 districts with 16,576 people, give us 10 maps to debate and to deliberate with, regardless of existing current lines and where people live that already hold office. Do I think in the end that's going to happen? I don't think so, but it's certainly going to be talked about because this is a political process facilitated by political people. And so, I know that many of the folks on this call advocated, as I did, the idea of an independent redistricting committee. So taking it out of the hands of the policymakers to draw their lines and make it an independent group who we would have to live with whatever is drawn. And I think that's the best fair way to do that.
So Josh, you mentioned maps. So the process of going into redistricting, will the maps be presented at the hearings, or will the public input process be first and then the maps will be drafted?
Good question. So like I said, next week we're being trained on the software, the mapping software, and each legislative caucus, so the House Republicans, the House Democrats, the Senate Republicans, and the Senate Democrats will all get a laptop with the software on it. So then we as caucuses can play with their own maps, and then Legislative Council, which is the staff in the Capitol, will also have software to help us. So we will bring ideas to the table. There'll certainly be public input on August 26th and an opportunity. Traditionally we hear from groups like the Leagues of Cities, the County Association, hopefully North Dakota Native Vote and other stakeholders who will talk about these are the priorities we'd like to see as part of the process. And then when we start meeting again in September, we will start as committee members. I will have the ability to bring a map or 100 versions of a map to the table and say, let's deliberate these. And every other committee member is going to have that opportunity too. And once we do that, then it's public record. If I make 100 versions of a map or one version, once I lay that on the table in the committee, it is accessible to the public. It becomes public record. Even with us beaming this all over the internet. People will have access to that. But up until that point, as I'm working on the process with myself or with the staff and legislative council, I won't have to turn anything over until I decide to. But anything that's presented at the committee is public record for the public to dissect and provide input on.
Great, thank you. Another question from the audience. I'm a North Dakotan who has been living in Oregon for 16 years. Is there any way for other staters to get involved?
No, that's a great question. I think so. I assume as a former North Dakotan or a North Dakotan who lives elsewhere, you have family and friends in the state. So helping get them educated on the process. The beautiful thing about our being a small state, we're basically one big town with long roads, is that, you probably know your former representatives from where you lived. Some of them might still be serving from when you left 16 years ago. So I think that legislators from your former communities are open to hearing from folks. I don't know if the entire, the entire legislature is interested in hearing from someone who doesn't live in North Dakota anymore, but you can then engage your family and friends that live here and encourage them to reach out to their legislators, or even just educate them on the process. There are going to be tens of thousands of North Dakotans who aren't even going to know this is happening. And it's going to be happening quick. So you have an opportunity to educate and inform people to encourage them to get involved.
Great, thank you for that answer. So the next question we have in the chat is, what happens to a representative / senator that gets cut from the district because of redistricting? Like what happened with District 7 in 2011, do they rerun or get assigned to a new district?
Yeah, good question. So the lines are going to move. So again, when we talk about if we're using the philosophy of we're working off of the current map and we're going to adjust lines based on that, or if we etch a sketch it, there are going to be legislators who are no longer in their current district. So let's say, for instance, it's no secret, I live 4 houses from the district line in my district. I'm in District 44. I border District 21 to the south of me, which is downtown Fargo. It's 4 houses between me and District 21. So if the line gets moved a block north of me and now I'm in District 21, then if I want to run as a legislator again, I would have to run in District 21, or I could move somewhere else, back into 44, or move out to Bismarck and run in District 7 out there. Those would all be options for folks, but there are certainly going to be legislators who are going to be grouped together, just again based on how the map is going to play out. There are going to be 2 legislative districts that are going to essentially disappear. They currently exist, but because of the population decrease in rural North Dakota, those 2 districts, if we keep 47 districts, those 2 districts are going to go somewhere else. And so there will be 6 legislators who won't have a former district. So they will have to decide if they want to run in their new district. A question that also comes up is the committee will have to decide. So a little background, I'm in District 44. Even numbered districts run during presidential elections. Odd numbered districts, so District 21 to the south of me, run in midterm years. So the next election, 2022, is a midterm year. And so the committee will make a recommendation, and as part of our legislation we propose to the special legislative session, we'll say that if X% of a district changes that isn't up for election in 2022, they will have to run for re-election. So I may still be a District 44 legislator when the lines are all done, but if my district moves or is shifted X population as determined by the committee, and in 2011 that number was 25%, so if 25% of the district changes, then I would have to run. District 44 would be up for re-election again. So anyone would be able to run for the seat then.
Wow, that's a lot to take in. So another question that we received in the Q&A boxes, are children considered in the population count or just voting age citizens?
Yeah, good question. Yes, it's all, you represent all people in your district. And so children are included. So that 16,000, I'm forgetting the number already, 567 people includes children as part of the district, because we're looking at that total. I think it was 759 or 774,000 North Dakotans is considered. So I think a question that comes up is, the census was during COVID, and it was done in the spring of COVID. So I have North Dakota State University that borders my district. I have a lot of students. I have some of the fraternities and sororities in my district, students that lived in my district but probably went home to do remote learning, and that's true in a lot of different college community, where there's colleges and universities, where were nursing homes and people left to go live with family, prison populations. So the census has had to do a lot of work, and that's where part of that, we got the information in April, and they've been working now in what they call deduplicating. And we just got a report on that, but it's my understanding, so don't quote me on this, anyone who watches this afterwards on Facebook, but it's my understanding what they did is, they were able to get the data from North Dakota State University that there were X number of students living in this residence that had a contract to live in this residence hall. Now, most of those students had gone back home because of COVID. So then they were able to use the data that said that when this student went and was counted back in Fessenden, North Dakota, they would then scrub them out if they got them counted back home out of the NDSU data. I don't understand completely how they all did that, but it's a way to make sure that if a student, or their best ability to say that if the 14,000 students at NDSU all went home, several of them going to Minnesota, most of them in North Dakota, they got counted maybe at home, but then if NDSU turned over data, or the county jail turned over data, or a group home turned over data, that people weren't counted twice. And that's the goal. There's probably going to be errors. I mean, it's just a matter of human error and the fact that trying the best they can, but it's my understanding that's what they were doing.
Thank you so much for your time tonight. We really do appreciate you taking the time to talk about redistricting and taking time out of your night to be with us. Do you have anything else to add to before we switch over to Jeff?
No, just again, thank you to you and Jessica and North Dakota Native Vote for the opportunity. I'm certainly open to answering questions in the future. With my background in education, I love helping people understand the legislative process and now the redistricting process. So look forward to working with you all over the next few months, and again, hope that we can have a fair redistricting process here in North Dakota.
Great, thank you so much, Representative Boschee. So now I will pass it over to Jessica, our communications coordinator, who will be in charge of the drawing that we promised at the end of this.
Thank you, Nicole, and thank you, Mr. Boschee, for sharing your knowledge with us this evening. Good evening, everyone. My name is Jessica Beheeler, and I'm the communications coordinator for North Dakota Native Vote. So this evening, we are going to use the picker wheel method to announce 3 lucky winners of the $50 gift cards. I'd like to apologize beforehand if I pronounce any of the names wrong. Here we go. All right, congratulations, Liz Herkes. For our next winner, congratulations, Don Morrison. And for our final winner for a $50 gift card from North Dakota Native Vote, good luck, everybody. Ben Hansen, awesome. So just to recap who the lucky winners are: Liz Herkes, Don Morrison, and Ben Hansen. Thank you everyone for participating, and I hope you all have an excellent night. Back to you, Nicole.
Great, thank you. As we wrap up, I just wanted to mention a couple things before I get you all off the line. And so North Dakota Native Vote is currently searching for community organizers. Our model of organizing, we believe in trusted voices, trusted faces. And so we want your people that live in your communities, that know your communities, and the leaders and all of the issues that come from your communities to be doing the work there. And so we are still looking for community organizers in Standing Rock, Fort Berthold, Turtle Mountain, and Spirit Lake. We have a post on our Facebook page. Please send any interested candidates to that link and we will follow up with them. And then, as Representative Boschee has mentioned, the first hearing for the legislative input process in redistricting, it will be August 26th. Follow our Facebook page. We will have a landing page that will be dedicated to redistricting, have all of the information on there and how to testify. And so reach out to us on our website, on our social media, or on our website, info@ndnativevote.org. Thank you so much, everyone, for participating. We really appreciate your time, and I hope you all have a good night.